Tonight, I tell you of the war that wasn't about land. The child who wasn't about survival. The fire that refuses, absolutely refuses, to go out. Lean closer. The wind is listening. A land untouched by names, where the sky was whiter than thought and the earth still smelled of thunder. The rivers had no borders, the winds no owners, and the language of survival was written in scars and silence. There were no nations, no kings, only the memory of deeds, passed from one open mouth to the next like the last warmth of a dying fire. In the center of this land, between a jagged ridge of black stone and a forest too thick for stars, the two clans gathered their dead. The Aura came from the north, wearing pelts hardened by frost and time. Their leader, Kamek, bore a necklace of teeth, not animal, but human. He did not speak often, but when he did, men listened as if the trees might fall if they didn't. Across the field of ash and broken branches stood the Sen, lean and painted in ochre, their bodies scarred in the spiral patterns of the hunt. Their chief, Dagon, was younger, faster, and burning with something the elders feared, a desire not just to survive, but to be remembered. They had clashed before, over water, over prey, over the insult of a stolen flint blade or a sacred stone disturbed, but this time was different. This time, Kamek's son had fallen. No one spoke his name now. Among the Oru, the dead were not named until vengeance had spoken louder. At dawn, the two clans stood facing each other across a stretch of blood-blackened grass. No words were exchanged, only gestures, hands lifted to the sky, blades tapped against bone shields, eyes narrowed like flint just before the spark. And then, the first cry tore through the silence. Not a war cry. Not a chant. A name, shouted into the rising sun like it could cut through stone. Eru. The name of the fallen. It was the way of the old ones, to fight not for land or food, but for the name. A name carved into bone and buried with honor. A name passed to the fire so it might rise with the smoke and live in the mouths of children not yet born. To die nameless was the true death. As the name echoed, the Auras surged forward, and the bone war began, not with a clash, but with a memory unleashed. They fought with spears whose tips had tasted mammoth blood, with axes made from the shattered skulls of wolves, with teeth and fists and silence. There was no music but the sound of breath and breakage. There was no plan, only fury and the hunger to etch one story into the marrow of the other. Some fell and did not rise. Some rose and did not remember they had been wounded. And in the middle of it all, Kamek and Dagon met. Their clash was not fast. It was heavy, like the earth itself grinding its teeth. One blow, then another. A block. A slip. A hand to the throat. A scream caught in blood. Dagon bled from the mouth. Kamek bled from the leg. Neither yielded. As the sun reached its highest, something changed. A scream rose from the Sen side, not fear, not pain, but another name. Maloan. Another fallen. Another name. Another war beneath the same war. Now there were two names in the air, circling like vultures made of memory, feeding on what remained of the living. The Oru and Sen did not retreat. They circled. They broke bones. They buried blades. They carved names into flesh with stone, so the bones would speak even if no one else could. And as the sky darkened into the ash-colored dusk, only one figure stood among the fallen, breathing like a beast that had outrun death itself. A child. Small, silent, wide-eyed, holding the toothed necklace of Kamek in one hand and the ochre-marked blade of Dagon in the other. No one came for the child that night. The wind rose again, and in its howl, the names drifted upward, Eru, Maloan, not as victory, not as loss, but as warning. The child did not cry. Crying was for those who could be heard. On the steppe, to be heard was to be hunted. Instead, the child moved through the broken bodies like mist, quiet, careful, unblinking. Blood had dried on his fingers, some of it not his own. Around him, the battlefield had already begun to forget. Flies hummed their mindless funeral songs. Birds circled overhead, waiting for stillness. The earth accepted everything without question. No one called his name. Perhaps he had none. In the customs of the old ones, a name was not given at birth, but earned, carried only once you'd done something the living couldn't forget. And now, surrounded by bones and legends, the child stood on the edge of becoming. He walked first to Kamek's body. The great warrior lay on his back, eyes open to a sky that no longer belonged to him. His chest was split, but his face was calm. The child knelt and took the tooth necklace, looping it gently around his own neck, like a blessing passed through flesh. Then he crossed the field to Dagon. The blade the young chief had used still pulsed with heat from the sun. It lay near his outstretched hand, which was wrapped around nothing, gripping only the dirt as if he tried to hold onto the land itself. The child took the blade too. Not as a trophy. As a reminder. He carried both objects like memories made solid, one on his chest, one at his hip. 2 names. 2 stories. 2 truths. And he was the only one left to carry them. Behind him, the rest of the clans were coming, slowly, cautiously, uncertain if the war was truly over. The old women came first, wrapped in animal skin, eyes like stones that had seen too many winters. They didn't cry either. They didn't need to. They simply looked at the child, saw what hung from him, and understood. This was not a survivor. This was a witness. The child would not be raised by the Ori or the Sen. He would walk between them. He would sleep under no banner, speak no lie, favor no name over another. He became the first of the rememberers, those who bore the weight of stories too painful for song. Years passed. The clans moved. Others rose. The bone war was not spoken of in daily speech. It was whispered during storms, mumbled beside dying fires, carved into rocks that no one would find for 1,000 lifetimes. But always, in each telling, there was the child. The one who wore 2 enemies at once. The one who never gave his name. And in time, those who fought wars asked not, what will I win? But, who will remember? The seasons turned like slow grinding stone. Grass grew where the blood had once soaked deep, and bones bleached under the pale sun until they became part of the land. The steppe forgot the cries but not the silence. The wind still bed low in that place, as if mourning something it could not name. The child, now older, hardened, his hair braided with sinew and time, became more legend than man. They called him the Nameless One, the Rememberer, the Walker of Ghosts. No tent claimed him, no fire called him kin, yet every clan offered him food, shelter, and space beside their dead when he appeared. He walked not for glory but for memory. When a warrior fell, he was there to ask the name. When a dispute neared blood, he would speak of those who had bled before. He wore the tooth necklace still, its edges dulled by decades of wind and wear. The ochre blade had long since chipped and dulled, but he kept it bound to his side with woven hair from both Oru and Sen lines, 2 enemies braided into one thread. Once, a chief from the east, a new tribe with fire in their eyes and steel from the mountains, asked him why he didn't choose a side. Why he didn't lead. The Nameless One looked at him, quiet for a long time, and said only, "The ground remembers more than the victor." Word of him spread beyond the steppe, carried by traders, shepherds, and those who followed no moon but their own. Some called him a myth, others a ghost. But the clans knew. He was not dead. He was still walking. One winter, colder than most, the Nameless One reached the place where the Bone War had been born. The trees were gone now, burned long ago for heat. The black stones still stood, cracked and leaning. No bodies, no weapons, just wind and memory. He sat there for days, speaking no words, eating no food, just watching the sky turn its ancient wheel. When the first snow fell, it covered him gently. The wind howled once more, just as it had all those years ago. And in that howl, the names returned. Eru, Malouin, Kamek, Dagon. And then, one more, spoken by the earth itself. Yin, a name never known, a name never spoken. Until now, the Nameless One had earned his name at last. Not through war, not through victory, through remembrance. When the snow melted in spring, the clans came to that place. They found the tooth necklace, gently laid upon a stone. The ochre blade rested beside it, tied with faded strands of hair. But there was no body. Only footprints leading into the horizon, slowly disappearing into grass. And so the story ends not with death, but with a name whispered in every fire, carried in every breath of wind, and etched into every child's heart. Yin, the rememberer, the last to forget, the first to remember. But legends, like rivers, do not stop when they reach the sea. They change course, become mist, fall as rain again, elsewhere, later, but always returning. Generations passed. New tribes rose from the ashes of old ones. They built their homes from wood, their weapons from iron, their songs from sorrow. Yet even as the world turned towards stone walls and sharpened blades, stories of the rememberer endured. In a village far from the steppe, where the trees grew thick and the stars were hidden behind cloud and smoke, a boy sat before a fire while an old woman whispered. "Do you know why we bury our dead facing the east?" she asked. The boy shook his head. Because that's the way he walked. Always toward the sun, so they might follow. The boy didn't ask who. He didn't need to. Every child knew. In their games, they played at being in, arms outstretched, eyes narrowed, walking between invisible enemies. Not a hero. Something older. Something deeper. A memory walking on two legs. And still, there were those who swore they had seen him. A trader passing through the misty hills of the north claimed a hooded figure had shared his fire, saying nothing until morning, then vanishing with the dew. A dying warlord, mad with fever, murmured a name none of his warriors recognized, moments before the light left his eyes. A hunter found a carved stone near a river bend no one used anymore. On it was etched a single line in an ancient hand, names outlived nations. These were not facts. They were not history. They were truths. And the steppe, vast, whispering, endless, still bore no cities, no monuments, no written books. Only wind. And if you stood there long enough, in the hour before sunrise, you might hear it speak. Not in words. In names. And if your heart was quiet enough, you might understand that the rememberer was never just a man. He was a promise. That no matter how high the walls rise, how loud the kings shout, how many banners fall into dust, there will always be someone who remembers. Far beyond the steppe, across mountain ranges where the air thinned and even the stars felt closer than the ground, scholars in tall towers gathered scrolls and stories, trying to pin truth onto parchment like butterflies onto cork. They argue over the existence of Yin. Was he a man, a myth, a metaphor? Some said the rememberer was never one person, but a line of chosen wanderers, passing memory from one body to the next, like fire carried in cupped hands. Others insisted he was a ghost, cursed to walk until every name lost to war was spoken once again. But among the people of the wind, the ones who lived closest to the old places, who still boiled bone for broth and sang songs to the moon. They didn't argue. They remembered. Every year, when the grasses grew tall and the air hung heavy with the scent of rain, they gathered in silence near the black stones, no longer cracked but gently cradled by moss and time. There were no priests, no chiefs, just a fire and the voice of a child, different every year, but always chosen by dreams. The child would step forward and speak only the names. No stories, no explanations, just names. Kamek, Dagon, Eru, Malwin, Yin. Sometimes more, sometimes fewer. And each name fell like a stone into the silence, rippling out across the gathered people. When the last name was spoken, the fire was left to burn out on its own. No goodbyes, no applause, because remembrance is not for the living. It is the promise we make to the dead. On the 100th gathering, the clouds rolled heavy and low. Thunder cracked like the bones of the earth. But still they came, old and young, lame and strong, warriors and weavers, even those who believed in nothing but the wind. When the chosen child stood, her voice shook. She forgot the first name. Silence fell heavy. A storm brewed overhead. Then, from the back of the crowd, a voice whispered, Kamek. Another joined. Dagon. Then another. Eru. Malwin. And finally, all together, every voice became one. Yin. The wind shifted. The thunder fell silent. And in that moment, no one was alone. They say that after the crowd left, the fire did not burn out. It burned brighter. Some believe Yin had returned. Others say he had never left. But those who were there, and those who will come after, know this. When names are spoken, Yin walks again. Not as a man. As a memory made flesh. As the breath between generations. As the quiet reminder that history is not written in stone, but in the hearts of those who refuse to forget. That night, long after the last footsteps had faded and the fire still smoldered with unnatural warmth, a traveler arrived. He bore no pack, no weapon, no tribe mark upon his brow. His cloak was stitched from hides no one could name, and his eyes, deep, dark, and unmoving, held storms that hadn't yet come to pass. He walked the sacred ground barefoot, silent, respectful. At the fire, he crouched, extending a withered hand into the heat that did not burn him. And then, with a voice like dry leaves rustling across forgotten graves, he spoke. You have remembered well. But memory alone is not enough. The air stilled. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. From beneath his cloak, he drew a bundle wrapped in bark and bound in reed. With slow, deliberate hands, he unraveled it. Inside were 5 stones, smooth, flat, carved. Each bore a symbol older than language. He placed them one by one around the fire. One for silence. One for sorrow. One for survival. One for blood. And one for truth. As the 5th stone touched the ground, the fire leapt up in a spiral of white flame. No smoke. No heat. Just light, and within it, shapes. Faces. Movements. Memories. The people of the first wars. The mothers who buried their sons beneath the stars. The ones who fell unnamed on battlefields long returned to grass. And Yin, not as a figure, but as many, a girl kneeling beside her brother, an old man tracing names into the dust, a wounded soldier whispering to the wind. The traveler closed his eyes. You remember their names. Now you must remember their wounds. And with that, he stood, turned, and walked into the night. No one saw him leave. No tracks were found in the morning. Just the 5 stones still glowing faintly around the now dead fire. From that year onward, the remembrance changed. It was no longer enough to speak the names. Now, each person brought something more, an offering of pain. A story untold. a truth that burned to speak aloud. Tears flowed freely. Silence became sacred. And with every word offered, the fire grew brighter. In time, the gathering grew too large for the black stones to hold. So it spread, first to other tribes, then to distant hills, to cities rising from dust and ruins. The remembrance became ritual, then tradition, then oath. We are the fire that remembers. We are the name that walks. We are the blood that does not forget. And though empires rose and crumbled, though maps were redrawn and languages lost, one thing never faded. The name Yen. No longer just the rememberer. Now the flame itself. Still walking. Still burning. Still keeping watch in the dark for those who would forget. Years passed, and the world changed. Stone gave way to steel. Smoke rose from forges where once only firewood burned. The wind no longer carried only the scent of grass and bone, but now the sour tang of oil, the echo of machines, and the grinding march of men who no longer feared the silence. Yet in quiet places, beneath bridges of iron, inside temples hidden beneath glass towers, and along the edges of forgotten rivers, the flames still flickered. Children were still told the story of Yen, though his name shifted with tongues and time, Yen the Walker, Yen the Whisperer, Yen of the 5 Stones. His figure adorned murals sprayed in secret on city walls and carved onto the undersides of coins passed quietly between strangers. No one remembered who first drew him with a spiral over his heart, but the symbol spread like roots beneath the surface of things. It was in one such place, a disused tunnel beneath the ruins of old Petra, that a boy named Ilian found the 5th stone. He hadn't meant to. He was hiding, as many did, from a world that had grown loud and merciless. The ceiling dripped water thick with rust, and every step echoed like a memory trying to return. But when his foot brushed something smooth beneath the dust, and his hand uncovered that ancient spiral carved into its face, everything around him stilled. The tunnel went silent. The air grew thick. And the fire returned. Not as a flame. As a pulse. It beat once beneath his hand. Then again. And with it came the memory, not his, but older, deeper. He saw the tents on the step. The horizon swallowing the sun. Kale standing beneath a sky filled with stars that had long since died. He saw Yen. And Yen saw him. No words were spoken. None were needed. Elian stood, cradling the stone, and stepped into the night. Across the world, others felt it too. In coastal towers and mountain vaults, in refugee camps and corporate bunkers, people paused. A humming in their blood. A flicker at the edge of thought. Some wept without knowing why. Others whispered forgotten names in their sleep. And a few, just a few, began to walk. Not toward anything, but with something. The memory had returned. And it would not sleep again. The bone war was long over. The blood had long dried. But the wounds, those sacred, echoing wounds, still taught, still warned, still called. And those who remembered, even now, knew the truth. Before nations, there were names. Before names, there were stories. And before stories, there was the fire. Still burning. Still waiting. Still walking. Lian walked without a map. Cities crumbled around him, but he moved untouched through war zones, past checkpoints that didn't see him, into lands marked forbidden on every screen. He did not age. He did not hunger. The 5th stone pulsed beneath his ribs like a second heart, and in dreams, the voice of Yen whispered, not his commands, but his memories returning in waves. With each step, he met others. A woman in the flooded ruins of Dhaka who sang forgotten lullabies to the dead. A one-eyed soldier in the Andes who refused medals and carved names into stone instead. A boy in the shattered heat of Nevada who heard voices in cracked asphalt, names whispered from beneath the bones of highways. They, too, carried stones. Not all were found in earth, some were born into them, others inherited them through blood, a few through scars they could not explain. And when these travelers met, there was no need for greetings. They simply sat. And remembered. From 5, they became 50. From 50, 500. Until, one day, Under a shattered sky and between the rusted skeletons of machines once called gods, they returned to the steppe. It looked nothing like the old stories. No grass. No tents. Just dust and wind and the shadow of memory. But the 5 black stones still stood, scarred, but unbroken. Each bearer placed their stone before them. Silence fell. No one spoke the names aloud this time. There was no fire to build. No child to choose. Because the world itself had become the child. And it was ready. The sky changed first. Not with clouds, but with sound. A low, echoing felt more than heard. Like the memory of thunder. Like a voice long buried. The stones pulsed in rhythm. The ground trembled. And then, from the cracks between time, the fire returned. Not in flame, but in form. Yin rose, not as man, not as woman, but as everyone. 1,000 faces, 1,000 lives, flickering like light through a prism. He spoke with the voices of every name ever lost, and when his feet touched the earth, the wind bowed. You have remembered, he said. Now you must choose. No one asked what the choice was. They knew. To remember was to carry pain. To speak truth was to burn. To walk forward meant abandoning the silence that had kept the world sleeping. And still, they stepped forward. Not all, but enough. They carried nothing, only names. They became the next fire. And so the cycle turned again, not as myth, not as history, but as a living oath written in the dust and blood and breath of those who refused to let memory die. For long after the last empire fell, long after the last machine sputtered and darkened, the story did not end. It walked, as all stories do. And in every corner of the sleeping earth, the whisper would return. Before gods, there were giants. Before giants, there were names. And before names, there was Yin. But even Yin, who had no beginning and no end, could not walk forever. Not because the fire faded, it did not, but because something new began to stir. In the centuries that followed the return to the steppe, the world healed in strange, uneven ways. Cities rose again, but not from concrete and greed. They grew like gardens from stone and ash, shaped not by kings but by rememberers. Children no longer memorized dates, but stories. They were taught how to listen to the wind, how to plant their ancestors' names in the soil. There were still wars, for people are still people. But they did not last long. Not when those who walked with fire stepped into the center and spoke the names of the dead, not as curses, but as offerings. The language of the old world, commerce, conquest, silence, shattered under the weight of names remembered. A single name, whispered with truth, could unmake a tyrant. A forgotten lullaby, sung in the ruins of a prison, could bring the walls down. Stories move faster than bullets. And still, no one built statues of Yin. They did not need to. For Yin had become part of the turning earth, the beating drum beneath all things. Every footstep on soil was a prayer. Every tear shed in remembrance was a torch relit. Every time someone chose to remember rather than erase, Yin walked again. Elian lived long, perhaps longer than he should have. He did not vanish like the myths say. He simply sat down one day at the edge of the world, where the sea poured into the sky, and placed the 5th stone at his feet. It no longer glowed. It no longer needed to. And then he slept. Not as a man tired of life, but as a soul returning home. No one marked his grave, but they remember the place. They call it the place of listening. It is said, when the wind is right, you can hear not just one voice, but all voices, the old warriors, the forgotten children, the mothers who died unnamed, the exiled, the vanished, the ones who never fit into any history but still mattered. And every now and then, a child, always a child, will leave their home and begin to walk. Not for war, not for power, but for remembrance. Because some fires never burn out. They walk, and walk, and walk, until once more, under a sky with new stars and a world reshaped by memory, the wind whispers again. Not all who walked returned, but those who did were changed. Their eyes held echoes, vast, timeless, deep as the spaces between stars. They spoke less, listened more. They could sit for hours beside a grieving stranger and say nothing, yet leave behind healing like a second heartbeat. They did not build temples, but they carved names into stones, trees, bones, and breath. The world grew quieter, not empty, but sacred. Great machines slumbered beneath vines. Roads cracked, gave way to forests. The sky cleared. The old noise of conquest and urgency dissolved into the gentle rhythm of growing things. And yet, deep beneath this peace, the flame endured. Somewhere in the north, beyond the shifting frost, the bones of the first giant still lay. Children dared each other to seek it, to climb the mountain that once touched the edge of the moon. Few reached the summit. Fewer still returned. But those who did brought back stories, stories that were never written, only spoken by fires, in voices just above a whisper. One day, a girl named Anna found an old mark carved in stone, half swallowed by moss. It was not a word in any known tongue. Just a curve. A line. A memory. And when she touched it, the wind stopped. The birds stilled. Time itself held its breath. From the earth beneath her, something pulsed. Not danger. A question. A call. And she answered. With nothing but her name. The stone glowed. Not brightly, but deeply. Like the coals of a long smoldering fire finally touched by breath. And far away, where the sea met the sky, the fifth stone pulsed again. Just once. Enough. Across the world, the rememberers stirred. They did not panic. They did not fear. They prepared. Because every cycle must return. Every silence must speak. Every story, if remembered truly, must one day awaken. And when it does not begin with a hero. It begins with a whisper. With a walk. With a name. And somewhere, even now, under stars unborn and time unmeasured, a child is listening. She listens not with her ears, but with her bones. Anna stands barefoot atop the stone, wind brushing strands of her hair across her face like the fingers of an ancient mother. Around her, the forest leans in, not menacing, but attentive, as if every root and leaf knows this moment matters. The glow beneath her feet fades into her skin. She does not flinch. She closes her eyes and lets the silence speak. Images bloom behind her eyelids, not visions, not dreams, but memories not her own. A great will turning. A giant kneeling. 1,000 names carved into the ribs of the earth. The scream of a world long ago cracking open beneath the weight of forgetting. The sound of a child's breath in the dark, holding on to the last flame as night swallowed everything. And then, light. Not bright. Not blinding. Gentle. A hand held out, not to command, but to walk beside. When Anna opens her eyes, she is no longer alone. Standing at the edge of the clearing is a woman draped in woven shadows and dawn light. Her face is unreadable, not because it hides emotion, but because it holds too many. A grandmother and a newborn. A leader and a lost child. A ghost and a promise. You heard, the woman says, her voice more thought than sound. Anna nods. You remember. Another nod. The woman steps forward, slowly, her hands empty. She kneels before Anai, not in reverence, but in equality. The stone between them hums low, ancient and alive. You are the first in 1,000 turns to answer with your name. Anai doesn't ask what it means. She doesn't ask what happens now. She simply replies, I wasn't the first to remember. Just the first to say it aloud. The woman smiles. Then say it again. Anai kneels too. Places her hand flat on the stone. Closes her eyes. And speaks. Not just her name. Every name. Names of those long vanished. Names never spoken. Names erased from history by fire, steel, silence. She becomes a vessel, and through her, the dead speak not in sorrow, but in return. The forest trembles. The sky lowers its gaze. The air glows faintly with all the stories too long buried. Far across the world, the place of listening stirs. The fifth stone cracks, not in breaking, but in blooming. And from it, a single blade of green pushes through. The world breathes again. And in that breath, one truth is reborn. We are not meant to rule the earth. We are meant to remember it. To walk with it. To name it. And to never again forget. Somewhere in the distance, a new voice rises. A child, newly born, speaks their first word. And the wind, for the first time in an age, answers back. The fire walks again. The fire walks again. But not in conquest. It moves gently, like a thought passed from elder to child, from stone to seed. It does not burn villages or crown kings. Instead, it nestles into hearts, flickering softly, asking only to be carried. By storytellers. By farmers. By those who sit beside the dying and whisper, you are remembered. Anai stands at the edge of the old forest as birds return, strange, brilliant birds with feathers like memory. They do not sing, but their wings shimmer with forgotten songs. One lands beside her. It does not fear her. Behind her, the trees part and people emerge. Not soldiers. Not priests. Just the curious. The brave. The broken who had not known they were broken. They had followed the stories as children follow the stars. One of them, a boy no older than 10, steps forward. His eyes are cloudy with ash. He has never spoken a word in his life. And yet, as he lays his hand upon the cracked stone beside Anai's, he whispers a single name. His mother's. The forest weeps too. The stone pulses once. That is enough. From that moment, the movement begins. Quiet. Gentle. Relentless. Across mountains and valleys, people begin to leave marks again, not for power, not for fame. They mark places with names, stories, offerings. They do not ask for gods. They do not build walls. Instead, they build circles. Circles of listeners. Circles of rememberers. Circles of those who walk without a destination, but with purpose. And through them, the fire moves on. Years pass. Maybe centuries. No one records time anymore. They measure it in stories. In footsteps. In the space between one memory and the next. One day, an old man sits alone at the place of listening. His beard is white with ash, his hands calloused from carving names. He was once a child of silence. He remembers the days when the world tried to forget itself. He looks out over the endless steppe and sees a girl walking. Just a silhouette, far in the dusk. She walks like the wind is beside her. Like the fire is beneath her. He smiles. She does not see him. She does not need to. She will carve her own names. She will speak her own fire. She will walk. And when the time comes, someone else will see her silhouette and smile. This is the world now. Not perfect, but remembering. Not peaceful, but walking. Not powerful, but awake. And if you listen, really listen, on a quiet night, you'll hear it again. Today, we begin again. Not because the old has ended, but because the path is never finished. The girl's feet press gently into the earth, and the soil holds her steps like pages of an open book. Each one a line, each one a beginning. Behind her, no one walks yet. But they will. They always do. Ahead, the world waits, vast and unfamiliar. Forests no longer marked by borders. Rivers no longer chained by names. Mountains no longer claimed. All of it alive. Breathing. Listening. She carries nothing but a satchel of stones, each carved with a single name. One for her mother. One for a brother she never met. One for a giant who once watched the sky from the bones of the earth. As night falls, the stars blink open, ancient and new, like eyes remembering a face. One falls, bright, silent, slow. The girl watches it and whispers not a wish, but a promise. I will remember. A nearby tree stirs, not from wind, but from something deeper. Roots whisper beneath her feet, connecting across the land like veins through a sleeping god. From far away, another remembers her. Not by name, not by face, but by the echo she leaves behind, gentle, warm, unshakable. By a fire that does not burn. Just as the fifth stone once pulsed, a sixth awakens. Not with light, with sound. A low hum, soft and steady, beneath the world. And in a village no map remembers, a woman stirs from sleep with tears in her eyes. She does not know why she cries. Only that something beautiful is beginning. Somewhere beyond her hut, a child carves her first symbol into bark. Not a word. A memory. And the fire walks again. From name to name. From silence to story. From forgetting to becoming. Not in one place, but everywhere. Because once the remembering begins, it never truly ends. And somewhere, right now, in the breath between your heartbeat and the next, the earth is listening for your name. So speak it. Not with your mouth, but with the way you move through the world. With how you notice the wind brushing the grass. With how you look at old stones and wonder who once wept beside them. Speak it when you choose to remember what others have buried. When you see ruins and don't ask, what was built here? But instead whisper, who loved here? The girl walks on, and the path doesn't harden, it softens. It becomes moss, then mist, then nothing but the rhythm of her breath. And still she walks. She begins to hum. A tune she doesn't know, but one the bones of the earth seem to echo. It is not in any language, but it belongs to everyone. Behind her, a single sprout pierces the soil. It bends slightly, not toward the sun, but toward the footprint she left behind. Elsewhere, in the deep ravines of the world, forgotten names begin to drift upward through stone. They do not scream. They do not demand. They simply rise, like smoke. Like dreams not yet dreamed. Anai's name, too, returns, spoken now by others, carried in story, not as myth, but as memory. The quiet warrior who knelt not to conquer, but to listen. And so the circles grow. Not temples, not nations, but gatherings of the old, of the young, of the uncertain. They sit, they share, they listen. Sometimes they cry, not because they are sad, but because they remember what it means to feel human. And the fire never dies. It passes, hand to hand, heart to heart, until one day someone like you finds themselves at the edge of a forest. The stone hums beneath you. The sky leans close. The ground is soft, and the story waits. The stars above you are not silent. They pulse with the same rhythm that hums in your bones, a rhythm older than language, older than gods, older even than time measured by calendars or kings. You don't know where you're going. No one ever does at first. But the path isn't made by knowing. The path is made by walking. Your fingers brush against the stone, still warm from someone else's touch. Their print is faded now, but not gone. You press your palm there, not to leave your mark, but to listen. And beneath your skin, the story stirs. A voice, not loud, not even spoken, gathers in the quiet space between thought and breath. It is not just one voice. It is many. A chorus of those who came before. Some were farmers who named the wind. Some were mothers who buried their children beneath moonlight. Some were giants who wept when they realized they could no longer lift the mountains. They do not give you answers. They give you weight. Not the burden of history. The honor of it. Behind you, others begin to gather. A child with no memory of her father, but a song in her throat that makes the trees lean in. A wanderer whose dreams are haunted by symbols he can't write but draws in the dirt anyway. A woman with scars and silence who now speaks only to fires, and they always answer. They do not ask you to lead. They do not ask you to follow. They sit beside you. And the world, this remembering world, exhales. The forest shivers. Not in fear, but in recognition. A leaf falls and lands in your lap. On it is a single, accidental mark, carved by weather, by insect, by time. But somehow, it looks like a name. A name you've never heard, but suddenly remember. You whisper it. The ground pulses beneath you, just once. Far away, a stone lights up faintly, as if smiling. You look to the sky, and one of the stars seems to dip lower, just enough to remind you that you are seen. And now, as the wind picks up and the fire glows between all your gathered faces, someone says, "Tell us what you remember." You take a breath, not because you know how the story ends, but because you know where it begins. The fire burned low, but it did not die. Its light curled through the circle, tracing the faces of those who had gathered, not as warriors, not as leaders, not even as survivors, but as rememberers. The girl, no longer a girl, sat in silence. Her satchel of carved stones lay open beside her, each name now whispered by another voice. She had carried them through storms, through hunger, through lands that no longer knew the names of their own rivers. Now, she did not need to carry them alone. One by one, others placed their own stones in the circle. Not heavy things, not burdens, but offerings. A brother's hum. A grandmother's laugh. A name for a tree that had stood so long it remembered the sky before clouds. And when the last voice spoke, not with words but with presence, the forest itself leaned forward. Leaves stopped rustling. Water ceased its chatter. Even the stars, bright and blinking, seemed to still. Because in that moment, the remembering was complete. Not perfect. Not finished. Just complete. The girl looked around the fire and saw that she was no longer alone. And she never had been. The giants of the old world did not vanish. They became the stories passed hand to hand, sung under breath, etched into bark, carved into stone. They walked still. Not in shadow, not in legend, but in us. Someone reached for her hand. She took it. Not to hold on, but to pass something forward. The fire did not need tending now. It had caught. It would burn in every circle like this, in every voice that chose to remember. And long after the last stone returned to the earth, after names became wind and wind became sky, still the world would hum. We were here. We remembered. We began. And so the story ends, not with silence, but with someone, somewhere, sitting beside a fire, and saying once more, "Today, we begin."